So this is the reflection and critique of the implementation plan. So in this video, I'll outline and critique the organisational development processes and implications these have when implementing the suggested plan for the management research report. I'll firstly outline the recommendations within the management research report, and then after that what I'll do is explore Wiseboard's 6-box model in relation to Tesco Bank. Following this, I'll revise my recommendations, and finally I will reflect upon the approach I took in coming to my original recommendations and the changes to my revised recommendations. So, recommendations in the management research report. So, the first recommendation was that Tesco Bank conduct further research into the subject area before implementing any changes or recommendations, and that was to collate data from all 4 sites as opposed to just the Newcastle site, which the management research report was based on. And the suggestion of how that could be done was through surveys of focus groups. So the second recommendation was to encourage that existing family-friendly HR practices and policies were highlighted to all employees, both male and female. And those are things such as job shares, flexible working and parental leave, just to ensure that those are implemented in a fair and consistent manner, giving employees the flexibility to juggle priorities or focus on other priorities, so for example their children for a period of time. And the third recommendation was to welcome women back into the workplace more effectively, following time away from work to give birth to and care for a child. So, what we're going to do now is look at Wiseboard's 6-box model. So, the 6-box model can be used to analyse organisations and produce a diagnosis of where the organisation is heading, or in this case, influence the recommendations. So what this model is going to do is it's going to give us a diagnosis of the organisation as it is now, and this is to understand the current environment of the organisation and to understand how the people work and how people behave. So we're going to start off with the purpose. So this is the core purpose at Tesco Bank. So that is clear. So that is, we make what matters better together, and they have 3 values. They are: no one tries harder for customers, we treat people how they want to be treated, and we use our scale for good. The structure in Tesco Bank. So the hierarchy in Tesco Bank is top down. So staff can be seen to be divided into subgroups, developed on the departmental status, and a partition can be seen between head office staff and operational staff. So the relationship, so conflict is managed informally, or where it needs to go formal, that would be with the support of HR. So conflict is inevitable, but the manner in which it's dealt with can produce positive outcomes which allow for growth. So the rewards, so with regards to financial reward, pay scales are negotiated nationally for staff. However, they may actually be rewarded through use of training courses to allow individuals to develop their knowledge so that they can become experts within their roles. So, for example, a more qualified individual may progress to a more senior position, and in return the organisation has staff who are perceived as more knowledgeable. And then they have helpful mechanisms, so these are the systems and processes that help people coordinate their efforts. So this could be portrayed as meetings, information systems, or coordinating job roles. So within Tesco Bank, there are a number of policies and procedures to help people organise how they apply the knowledge. and leadership. So the leadership in Tesco Bank is top down and of an autocratic style. Leadership is influenced by Tesco Group plc, and it's worth mentioning that the senior leadership team in Tesco Bank are predominantly male, so there's an 80-20 split of male to female. And then finally, the last thing worth mentioning is the environment. So that's just the constraints and demands imposed by the external environment. Okay, so just to move on to action systems. So from a systems thinking approach, for the WISE board model to be effective, all the elements must fit together. So the scope of the management research report and WISE board's 6-box model suggests that in the current state the organisation is unhealthy. So from the research, 2 underlying issues can be seen. The first one is that the organisation has not yet embraced the diversity and inclusion strategy. And the second one is that the perception is that there are barriers for women in Tesco Bank. And again, this brings us on to action research. So what we've got there is Lewin's model of systems thinking. And his description of the process of change involves 3 steps. So the first step is unfreezing. So that's when an organisation is faced with a dilemma or disconfirmation, and the individual or group becomes aware of a need for change. So once they've identified a need for change, then the next step is in the middle there, changing. So that is when the situation has been diagnosed and new models of behaviour are explored and tested. And then following that, they go into the refreezing stage. So that is the application of a new behaviour, and that's evaluated and reinforced and adopted. So it's important to acknowledge that this model, as in order to change and develop an organisation, you need to appreciate the feedback loops of learning. So this will be taken into consideration in the next slide, which is a critique of the recommendations in the management research. So the critique of the recommendations in the management research report. So whilst the first recommendation is still relevant, taking into consideration the literature regarding organisational development, WISE board's 6-box model outlines the need to consider the target areas, or the 6 boxes. So before any further research is carried out, it's important to take into consideration the findings of the 6-box model. So the key question is whether the research links to the purpose and the value of the organisation. Then, if the leadership and structure supports this, if it does, then promotion and awareness of the diversity and inclusion strategy and the Tesco networks would be key before engaging in any further research. So with regards to the second and third recommendations, again, those recommendations are still relevant. However, taking into consideration Lewin's model of action research and the unfreezing element of the process, it's important that the group becomes aware of a need to change. So that was outlined in point 1 of the model before actually attempting to change the situation. So whilst the recommendations could be put in place, if the employees don't understand the reason why a change has taken place, then by implementing the recommendations 2 and 3, chances are that's going to be less likely to be successful. So the revised recommendation based on the management research report. So taking into consideration Wiseboard's 6-box model and the reflection on the current recommendations, the recommendations have been adjusted as follows. So the key recommendation was for senior leaders to promote we treat people how they want to be treated value, and also promote the support networks that they have within Tesco Bank. So that's including the Women in Business Network, so that a culture can be created where everyone is welcome. And that's about the employees actually understanding that so that they can work towards that. So the intended outcome, so by doing that, would be that employees understand the diversity inclusion strategy and their role in making this successful. So the intended result is that employee awareness changes attitudes, and again it raises awareness of the networks. So one limitation, or the limitations of this approach, could be that the senior managers may not fully understand the importance of employees understanding the strategy. Therefore, the recommendation would be that the HR director clearly articulates to the senior leaders the impact of engaging the workforce and what it would actually mean if they actually understood that value, and created a culture where everyone could be welcome through highlighting the networks. So thinking about that recommendation, it's important to consider the costing. So the senior managers already hold town halls across all 4 sites. So the suggestion will be that an awareness session is held throughout one of those sessions. So as the town halls are already budgeted for, meaning the travel costs, hotel costs, staffing costs for employees to attend, etc., this will mean that the only cost implication of that will be resource costs and travel costs for additional speakers. So Teresa, who is the HR director, sometimes actually attends the town halls, so this may actually reduce costs further. Thinking about the timescales, so the town halls normally happen every 3 months, so that could happen within the next 3 months, and that would coincide with, as I say, the pre-scheduled town halls. So what I would probably suggest from that would be, once the awareness sessions had been held at town halls, check how this is actually being received with employees, and that could be through a short survey on the company intranet, but also raising awareness in existing weekly communications such as email briefings. So just reflecting on the implementation plan of the management research report. So the approach which I took, I didn't use academic models to determine the recommendations. So the recommendations were purely based on participant suggestions, and some of these were supported by the literature. So my key findings from looking at the academic models were that I need to understand the organisational design before suggesting recommendations. Otherwise, they may be relevant, and people may not understand them. Therefore, they may not be committed to the change. So the limitations of the approach that I took, I didn't take into consideration the complex nature of the change within organisations. So, as mentioned above, by just implementing the original recommendations, it wouldn't necessarily change people's thoughts, and they still wouldn't understand that Tesco want to create a culture where everyone feels welcome. So my reflections. So I could have used a number of academic organisational models to explore organisational design when and during coming up with my implementation plan. And this would have ensured that my recommendations were appropriate. I also could have used the theoretical models, such as Anderson's model, to support with costing.